Hey there guys, so first tutorial, going to keep it pretty simple. What we're going to do here is we have data and we're just going to create a very simple summary of that data. What I want to do as well is create an interesting way of viewing that data that's replicable in an easy way, right? Like almost like creating like a template for the summarization of that data. So what is our data? So the data that we have here is just simple like spending data on bank statements or whatever. And what we're going to do here is we're going to summarize that data in a particular way and with a view to create like almost that template view. So what are our fields? We've got date, spender, store, which I've kind of like basically this data set is completely made up, but I've tried to make it somewhat realistic, although the numbers are complete garbage. But at least, it's got a few categories. We could go through these, and various amounts for every spend over a 3-month date range or 2.5-month date range. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a new sheet. Now, first thing I want to do here is I actually want to rename the sheet to something that makes sense. Let's call it like expenses data rather than just leaving it as sheet 1. This in general is just good practice for when you create spreadsheets, right? Or like models, because it just makes it a lot easier to know what you're looking at on every sheet rather than it being just like sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, whatever. So here we'll just call this, let's call it summary for now, but we might change that. This is what I want to do. I just want to summarize this by day. So as you can see, there are various days here, but what I want to do is summarize that information per day. So let's start with the first day that we have, and then with days and numbers, you can actually just drag down from a number, and it will automatically know to increment them by 1. So that'll be the date. What we have over here is, let's call this spend. So I want to just look at my spend per day, basically. And we'll just do, well, we want to sum these guys by this. And this is a little trick that I use. I just because I like using keyboards more than using the mouse. As you can see, it's quite a bit faster. So what I'm trying to do here as well is just work at my kind of normal working speed, just so you can see how fast you can be in Excel. I think I'm relatively, speedy when it comes to manipulating Excel using a keyboard. And I basically only use a keyboard. You might see the mouse move once or twice just because I'm being a bit lazy, or not lazy actually, because it's a lot slower. But it's more work to use a mouse. Maybe just, spice it up a bit. But yeah, basically it's way quicker to use the keyboard. So what we're going to do here is we are going to have the cumulative spend. And I'll show you what this looks like and why I want to look at it this way. So a little trick here when you're doing things like cumulative spends. First of all, let's always keep the width of a cell to a reasonable width so you can actually see what you're looking at. And something that quite a cool little trick you can do here is usually what you would want to do, the formula would look something like this, right? It would be whatever the spend is that day plus what came before it on a cumulative basis. The problem is that Excel doesn't let you use the plus part of a formula with a text field. A way to get around that is the sum formula treats text's values as zeros. So actually the sum formula works there. What you could have done instead is just made this cell equal to the first spend, and then the other cells have a different formula. But I don't like having different formulas. That doesn't work for me. I'd rather have a single formula that works in all instances. And we don't care about this. Right, so, and what is the reason for doing that? Well, let me show you what the spend looks like per day. Okay, these numbers are made up, so who cares about what the numbers actually are? But what I want to get across here is that it's actually quite difficult to see what's going on here. There's a lot of noise, a lot of variation in the data, and it's actually hard to see. Okay, yeah, cool, you can see, okay, this day we spent the most, and there was like a blip in spending over here and here on the downside, but then, you know, a couple of big days over here. So that's quite interesting. But it's much harder to see if there's any kind of like general average that occurs by day. So cumulative spend is just another way of looking at the exact same data, but you can see that it's looking a lot more like there's a underlying pattern to the kind of spending. It kind of what I like about it, it almost removes some of that noise, and you get to see that underlying trend. Now, sure, you don't necessarily get to see as easily which days are the largest spends, but you know, it's where the graph goes up in like spurts, right? So it's going to be here, here, here. So it's maybe not as intuitive, but I think you get a lot more out of this graph. Just personally speaking, I kind of like it a bit more. Another thing that we can do is let's just look at what the average is, and I'm just going to write that over here. So the average per day is this number. What we're going to do is actually use the same, very similar formula. We're just going to do that for the first day plus this number. And that just says if I had to spend the average per day, I'm using that same technique here with sum. If I had to use the average per day, if I had to spend the average per day, exactly the average per day, what would that look like? Basically it's going to be a straight diagonal line, but then we can see that compared to our spends. So let's throw that in there and see. I have definitely summed the wrong things here, or have I? Let's see. Oh, no, that's correct, because there's the total spend there, there's the total spend, there's the total spend. As you can see, the averages all come to the same as the cumulative spend. And there we go. So if you had to spend the average exactly per day, you would be spending that amount. And as you can see over here, we're spending almost exactly the average per day. So that's pretty interesting. That's quite cool. You can already see there's a definite pattern in your data, right? And you could say there's kind of a smaller average over there. What you might also want to do is strip out the large spends, see the underlying average, and then reintroduce those large spends. And that gives you a bit of two different patterns. One is a underlying kind of a smaller spends and a pattern to that, and then maybe a more random large spend pattern. So it's just different ways of thinking about looking at data, right? And this is a nice way to start getting a feel for that data. And like I said, this is just spend data, but you could use this for anything, right? It's these kinds of approaches, thinking about how to look at data. So what I'm going to do next is just add in one more thing that will allow us to create almost like a template view, and that's what I wanted to kind of get out of this quick tutorial. So we're just going to call this template. And what I want to do here is I'm going to call this category, and what we're going to do is be able to say take a drop down list of different categories, and then this spreadsheet will change to only show the spending amounts from the category that you've selected. Let's do this in a quick way. There's many ways to do this. Let's just do this in one quick way. So one way to get how many categories there are in the data is to just copy and paste that field, and then do the remove duplicates. This data does have a heading, and we'll just do that, and boom, you get your 14 unique values. All good. That was quick. So let's just call this categories. Right, now the problem with this is that if your expense data is updated and there are new categories in there, then unfortunately you'd have to redo this manually. So there are other ways to make it a more, how can we call it, a more like automated approach. But actually the automated approach kind of bogs down the model quite a lot. so it's not necessarily something I'd recommend. Maybe a macro would be a faster way of doing something like that, where it can just sift through what's in here and plug in these values using macros, VBA. It's like a programming language if you've never used it in Excel. So what are we going to do here? Let's just do a quick data validation. Let's create a list over here. Boom. And we can choose, I don't know, coffee, right? So what we're going to do is just in our sum ifs, we're actually going to choose, coffee from there. And let's lock down that part of the formula. And boom. So that is the spend in coffee per day, looking at the average and the kind of cumulative spend over the time period. And what you can see here is that it's looking pretty average overall. You know, these are, I think what I put in the data was weekends. So that's, you know, there's probably some weekends there where there's no coffee spends. So, you know, get a coffee before work or whatever. That shows up in your data. So now we can just change this to, what should we do? Let's do restaurants. Clearly not going to a restaurant very often, maybe once every 2 weeks or something in this data. And yeah, that gives you a bit of insight what's going on there. You can change it to alcohol. Clearly had a bit of a binge over there, and then relatively dry for the rest. And if we look at books, random purchasing, online shops, some big old buys over there creeping through. So yeah, so you can just change this. What I like to do is for a field which you can change is give it a bit of a difference. Give it like a different color scheme, so that, you know, intuitively someone knows, oh, that's different to the rest of the spreadsheets. Clearly I can do something with it, which you can. Personally speaking, what I like doing is having a empty column on the side. Why I like doing that is if I want to cruise around my spreadsheet using Control and you know, Control Shift lets you select different data very quickly. If I want to get to the top left hand side of the spreadsheet, I can just always go to the left, right to the left, and then right to the top, and I'm always at the top left hand of the spreadsheet, which just accelerates the speed of getting around that spreadsheet if that's what I want to do. So that's pretty cool. As I said, we want to create a template out of this. So clearly you can see that we can do something very easily over here, and that's just before we do that, actually, I do want to do one thing before we try this, doing this a few times, and that is just on our chart, just to add a where is it? Chart title. Let's do above, and then what you can do in here is just say, can make it equal to a formula. So let's just do that. And what I'll do now is I'll just copy paste, basically is what that's doing, and let's just call it groceries. And then actually what you can do here, which is pretty cool, you can actually make, like if you wanted to, I'm not going to do it right bracket was. Let's just take the formula and pop it in there. Now the cool thing is if you do something like coffee, see, spell it correctly, boom, it just updates your spreadsheet. So now obviously we've got coffee there. Another thing I'm going to do just before I move on, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. It's just a bit neater when you go at 85%, especially if you're using like Calibri, I think that's how you pronounce it, as your font. Yeah, size 11. 85%, it just looks quite neat. I don't know, it's a personal preference. So we've got coffee, we've got groceries. Clearly, if you don't change them, or if the name is not something that's on the list, then it's just going to give you 0 values, which is actually exactly what we would want. As you can see over here. So this is a way to very quickly create different categories over here. Another thing that you could do, I'm not going to do this here, but you could actually make this a formula that reads based on which sheet number it is. It reads off this list, and then it wouldn't necessarily change the names here, but what it would do is update this name for depending on which spreadsheets you had, and then you could just like create new spreadsheets and it would automatically change the name and boom, give you the spend. You'd have to rename each spreadsheet, but you could do that pretty simply. You could also then create a macro that just blasted those out and changed the names. Very simple. So that's what I wanted to go through today. Simple stuff, but hopefully gives you a view as to how you can think of A, looking at data, and B, how you can think about setting up your spreadsheets in a way that you can, basically like templates that are very easily copyable, so to speak. So you can create one analysis and then you can actually just replicate that analysis a bunch of times. Saves you a lot of time, and it lets you do a lot of things in a consistent way, right? So another thing is if I'm looking at these two tabs, I can just page up, page down, look at the two of them very quickly together. Another thing I might want to do is also fix the y-axis over here so that they're on the same scale. So if that goes to 1800, if I just format this axis over here to go to 1800 as well, you'll see clearly that also gives you a bit of a scale. It's a bit harder to see this data now, but what it does give you a sense of is how much of a difference coffee and groceries make as to kind of the total expense numbers. Hopefully that's a very easy to follow, quick summary of how to make templates in Excel that are interesting and easy to create and easy to kind of replicate for different things, which is the nature of a template, right? So hopefully this has been interesting. Please do feel free to ask questions in the comments below and suggestions for other things you'd like to see. Like I say, this is relatively simple in the grand scheme of things for Excel, but I thought, it's a good place to start. But as I mentioned, give me a shout in the comments below, and looking forward to the next one. Thanks, guys.